Life was simple for James Miller, a humble farmer who spent his days tending to his wheat fields in America's heartland. Every morning, he'd wake before dawn, check his crops, and prepare for another day of honest work. But everything changed when he found something extraordinary in his field. A strange, starving creature that looked like a baby dragon, but with features that seemed more alien than earthly. Despite his initial shock, James couldn't ignore a creature in need. He took it in, fed it, and nursed it back to health. Soon, mysterious lights began appearing over his farm at night. His crops started growing in ways he'd never seen before. The creature was changing his land, transforming it into something magical. Could this strange baby dragon be the key to unlocking powers beyond our world? What would happen when it finally revealed its true potential? The morning frost crunched beneath James Miller's boots as he made his way across the farmyard, his breath visible in the pre-dawn air. He'd made this walk thousands of times before, guided by the familiar weight of his grandfather's leather-bound journal in his coat pocket. The book was worn smooth from years of use, its pages filled with generations of farming wisdom and weather predictions that had proven more reliable than any modern forecast. Today felt different, though. The air held an unusual stillness, and the normally chattering birds were conspicuously silent. James paused at the edge of his wheat field, pulling out the journal and running his calloused fingers over its spine. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind, "The land speaks to those who listen. Some mornings it whispers of change." The strange blue glow among his crops certainly wasn't mentioned in any of the journal's weathered pages. At first, James thought it might be light reflecting off morning dew, but as he approached, the glow pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. There, nestled in a flattened circle of wheat, lay a creature unlike anything recorded in his grandfather's careful observations. It was roughly the size of a young calf, but that's where any comparison to familiar farm animals ended. Its body was covered in crystalline scales that shifted between deep indigo and pale azure. A delicate membrane stretched between spined wings that seemed too fragile to be practical. But it was the creature's eyes that stopped James in his tracks. They were filled with galaxies, swirling patterns of stars that spoke of distant worlds. The being was clearly struggling to breathe, its sides heaving with labored effort. Despite its alien appearance, James recognized the universal signs of a creature in distress. His grandfather's journal held no advice for this situation, but its most important lesson rang clear: all life deserves compassion, even that which we don't understand. Slowly, James knelt beside the creature. It made a soft, trilling sound, somewhere between a bird's song and the wind through crystal chimes. The sound tugged at something deep in his chest, awakening an instinct he didn't know he possessed. This creature needed help, and whatever it was, whatever consequences might come, James knew he couldn't walk away. "Easy there, little one," he murmured, reaching out with weathered hands that had calmed countless frightened animals before. The creature's scales were warm to the touch, despite the morning chill, and seemed to pulse with an inner light. "Let's get you somewhere safe." As he gathered the being into his arms, its wings folded like origami against its body, James felt the weight of the moment. His grandfather's journal had prepared him for many things: drought, disease, the countless challenges a farmer might face. But nothing could have prepared him for this moment, cradling what appeared to be an alien dragon in his arms as the sun rose over his wheat fields. The creature nuzzled weakly against his chest, seeking warmth, and James knew his life would never be the same. Some mornings brought rain, others brought sunshine, but this morning had brought something beyond imagination. As he carried his strange find toward the barn, the pages of his grandfather's journal pressed against his heart, James wondered what other wonders this day might hold. The old barn had sheltered many creatures over the years, but never anything like this. James worked quickly as the afternoon sun began to fade, clearing space in one of the empty horse stalls. He laid down fresh straw, rigged up an old heat lamp he usually saved for spring chickens, and filled various containers with water, though he wasn't entirely sure if the creature would even drink water as earth animals did. The alien dragon hadn't moved much since he'd brought it in, curled in a tight ball of shimmering scales and folded wings. Its breathing had steadied somewhat, but those galaxy-filled eyes followed James's every movement with an unsettling intelligence. "You need a name," James mused aloud, more to break the otherworldly silence than anything else. "Can't keep calling you creature in my head." The being tilted its head at the sound of his voice, making that crystalline trilling noise again. As darkness fell outside, James noticed something extraordinary. One of the creature's scales had loosened and fallen onto the straw. Unlike the others still attached to its body, this one didn't pulse with inner light. Instead, it had transformed into what looked like a piece of living crystal, refracting the barn's dim lighting into impossible colors. He picked it up carefully. The scale was warm to the touch and lighter than it looked, almost weightless. When he held it up to the light, he could see patterns within that reminded him of frost on a winter window, but they moved and shifted as if alive. A soft whimper from the creature drew his attention back. Its eyes had taken on a silvery sheen, and it was trying to reach some hay bales stacked nearby. Understanding dawned. It was hungry. James tried everything he could think of. Hay was met with disinterest. Grain received a puzzled head tilt. Even the sweet apples from his small orchard earned only a gentle sniff. He was about to give up when he noticed something strange. Where the creature's crystalline scale had fallen, the surrounding straw had begun to glow with a faint bluish light. "Now that's interesting," James murmured. He gathered some of the glowing straw and offered it to the dragon. Its reaction was immediate. Those stellar eyes widened, and it eagerly consumed the transformed plant matter. As the night deepened, James discovered that anything the creature's scales touched began to take on that same otherworldly glow. More importantly, it could eat these transformed materials. He spent hours watching in fascination as it turned ordinary barn straw into luminescent strands before consuming them. Around midnight, something even more remarkable happened. The dragon stretched its wings for the first time, and the barn's interior erupted in shifting patterns of light. The beams and walls reflected colors that James had no names for, while motes of glowing energy danced through the air like fireflies. "Made of starlight." "What are you?" James whispered. But he knew he wouldn't get an answer, at least not yet. The creature simply trilled again, a sound that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. Before heading back to the house, James carefully wrapped the fallen scale in his handkerchief and slipped it into his pocket. Something told him he should keep it close, though he couldn't have explained why. He made one final check on his unusual guest, who had curled up again but seemed stronger now, the lights beneath its scales pulsing in a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. As he walked back through his darkened fields, James noticed small patches of wheat glowing with that same ethereal blue light. Whatever this creature was, its presence was already changing things. He touched the scale in his pocket and wondered what dawn would bring. That night, James dreamed of distant stars and worlds where crystal dragons soared through technicolor skies. When he woke, he found a dusting of luminescent particles on his pillow, glowing softly in the pre-dawn darkness. The scale had shed some of its substance while he slept, marking him with its otherworldly essence. Somehow, he knew this was just the beginning. Dawn brought new challenges. James stood in his workshop, surrounded by various containers and feeding implements, trying to solve a peculiar problem. The dragon wouldn't eat from regular bowls. The metal seemed to interfere with its ability to transform food. Plastic melted at its touch. Wood worked better, but quickly degraded from the creature's energy field. After several failed attempts, James had an idea. He retrieved his grandmother's old ceramic mixing bowl, the one she'd always claimed had special properties because it was made from clay dug right on the farm. Using tools passed down through generations, he carefully etched spiral patterns into its surface, mimicking the swirling designs he'd seen in the dragon's eyes. "Let's see if this works better," he muttered, running his fingers over the finished design. The bowl felt different somehow, almost warm to the touch. The dragon's reaction was immediate. As soon as James set down the modified bowl, filled with ordinary wheat stalks, the creature approached with interest. Its scales began to pulse with stronger light, and the wheat inside the bowl started to transform, taking on that now familiar blue glow. For the first time, James heard a new sound from the dragon, something like a purr, but with harmonics that made the air itself seem to vibrate. The creature ate eagerly, and as it did, the etched patterns on the bowl began to shine with the same otherworldly light. That afternoon, while checking his fields, James noticed something extraordinary. Small patches of his wheat had begun growing at an impossible rate. The stalks in these areas stood nearly twice as tall as their neighbors, and their golden color had a subtle iridescent quality, like oil on water. "Well, that's different," he said, examining one of the transformed stalks. The grain heads were larger too, each kernel seeming to contain its own tiny universe of swirling colors. A shadow passed overhead. The dragon had followed him out to the fields. It was stronger now, able to glide short distances, though true. Flight still seemed beyond its capabilities. It landed beside him with surprising grace, those stellar eyes fixed on the transformed wheat. The creature made a series of musical trills, and James could have sworn it was trying to explain something. He watched in amazement as it touched one of the normal wheat stalks with its snout. The transformation spread like ripples in a pond, each plant it touched beginning to glow and grow. "You're not just eating the energy," James realized. "You're changing things, making them more." The dragon trilled again, a sound of clear approval. Back in the barn that evening, James noticed other changes. The modified feeding bowl had become something more than just a container. When empty, it hummed faintly, and any organic matter placed inside began to transform on its own, without direct contact from the dragon. A sudden gust of wind rattled the barn doors, carrying with it the sounds of approaching vehicles. James peered out, through a gap in the wooden slats. A truck he didn't recognize was pulling up his driveway, the local news station's logo emblazoned on its side. "Looks like someone noticed those lights last night," he told the dragon, who had pressed close to his leg, scales dimming slightly. "Don't worry. They can't see you in here." But as he watched more vehicles approach, James knew keeping his extraordinary guest a secret wouldn't be possible for much longer. The transformed wheat was visible from the road now, and people would have questions. He touched the crystalline scale he still carried in his pocket, drawing comfort from its warm glow. The dragon trilled softly, and James felt a wave of reassurance wash over him, as if the creature was telling him everything would be all right. He looked down at those galaxy-filled eyes and realized that somehow he trusted this impossible being more than he feared what was coming. "We'll figure this out together," he promised, and the dragon's scales brightened in response. The modified bowl pulsed with light, casting intricate patterns across the barn walls, like a message written in a language of light and shadow that James was only beginning to understand. The reporters didn't stay long that first day. What could James tell them? That his unusually tall, shimming wheat was the result of an alien dragon? Instead, he mumbled something about experimental organic farming techniques and closed his gate. But that night, something happened that would make hiding the truth much harder. James was collecting seeds from the transformed wheat when he noticed they had begun to pulse with their own rhythm, like tiny heartbeats in his palm. Each seed gleamed with an inner light that shifted between deep blue and violet, casting shadows that moved in impossible ways. "You're really something special, aren't you?" he said to the dragon, who was perched on a nearby fence post, wings partially unfurled in the evening breeze. The creature responded by launching itself into the air, stronger now than even that morning. The sight that followed would change everything. As the dragon flew over his fields, trails of light cascaded from its wings, creating curtains of luminescence that rippled through the evening air. Where the light touched, the wheat began to transform en masse. Entire sections of the field, coming alive with otherworldly energy. But it wasn't just the wheat. The soil itself was changing, taking on a subtle glow that pulsed in harmony with the seeds in James's hand. When he knelt to touch the ground, it felt warm and seemed to hum. With vitality, earthworms emerged, their bodies traced with lines of bioluminescence, leaving trails of light as they moved through the soil. The dragon landed beside him, looking pleased with itself. It nuzzled the pile of glowing seeds, and they responded by floating into the air, arranging themselves in complex geometric patterns that rotated slowly like a miniature galaxy. "My God," James whispered. In all his years of farming, all the wisdom passed down through generations, nothing had prepared him for this. The seeds began to plant themselves, each one diving into the transformed soil with purpose. Immediately, sprouting shoots that grew visible in real time. A distant rumble of vehicles brought James back to reality. More curious onlookers were gathering at his property line, drawn by the spectacular light show. Camera flashes flickered in the growing darkness. The dragon seemed unconcerned, focused entirely on continuing its work. As James watched, he realized the creature wasn't just transforming his farm. It was upgrading it, turning ordinary crops into something that bordered on miraculous. One of the glowing seeds had fallen into his shirt pocket, and he could feel its warmth against his chest, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The sensation reminded him of something his grandfather used to say: "The land remembers everything we do to it, good or bad." Now the land was remembering something else. Something older than human agriculture, perhaps older than Earth itself. The dragon's stellar eyes met his, and for a moment James understood. This wasn't just about his farm. This was about awakening something that had been sleeping in the earth since the beginning. More lights appeared on the horizon, and this time they weren't just curious neighbors. Police cruisers and what looked like government vehicles were approaching. The dragon trilled a note that made the floating seeds freeze in midair, then scatter back to earth like a rainfall of stars. James knew decisions would have to be made soon, but watching the glowing seeds take root, seeing the literal transformation of his land, he felt strangely calm. Whatever came next, he was part of something extraordinary now. The proof was all around him, written in letters of living light across his fields. "Come on," he said to the dragon. "Let's get you inside before they arrive." The creature followed him willingly, but not before touching one last patch of earth with its snout. The ground there erupted in a fountain of luminescent energy that spread outward in concentric rings, marking the beginning of a change that could no longer be hidden or denied. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. James had set up the old time-lapse camera the previous evening, more out of instinct than planning. Now, reviewing the footage in his kitchen while government vehicles gathered outside, he could hardly believe what he was seeing. The nighttime recording showed waves of transformation sweeping across his fields like aurora borealis touching the ground. Where the light passed, plants didn't just grow, they evolved. Wheat stalks developed intricate crystalline structures within their cells, visible through suddenly transparent outer layers. Corn plants sprouted luminescent tassels that swayed in rhythmic patterns even when there was no wind. But it was the second half of the recording that made James's hands shake. Around midnight, the dragon had appeared in frame, its wings now spanning twice their original size. As it glided over the fields, strings of light connected it to every plant below, forming a living network of energy. The creature wasn't just changing individual plants, it was rewriting the very language of life. "They're going to want to—" "You see this," he murmured, touching the crystalline scale in his pocket. The dragon, curled up beneath his kitchen table, trilled softly in response. It had refused to stay in the barn, somehow sensing the importance of staying close. A firm knock at the door made them both freeze. Through the window, James could see men in dark suits standing on his porch, their vehicles forming a perimeter around his farm. The dragon's scales dimmed, almost instinctively. "Mr. Miller," a voice called. "This is Agent Sarah Chen from the Department of Agriculture. We need to discuss the unusual activity reported on your property." James glanced at his unexpected companion. The dragon's galaxy eyes met his, and suddenly the time-lapse camera sparked to life again, projecting its footage onto the kitchen wall.
But this dragon has got entire planets, turning barren rocks into gardens, living again.
This wasn't an invasion or an accident. It was first contact in its purest form, wrapped in the familiar shape of farming. His guest wasn't just a lost creature, it was a gardener of worlds. He looked at the camera, still recording as new. Transformations rippled across his land. Whatever happened next would be documented, undeniable. The truth of his extraordinary visitor would be revealed not in military bases or scientific laboratories, but here, on a family farm that had nurtured life for generations. "Coming," he called, standing up. The dragon rose with him, its scales brightening with renewed purpose. Through the window, James could see his fields shimmering in the morning sun, each plant a testament to something remarkable taking root in the heart of America's heartland. As he reached for the door handle, the dragon pressed against his leg, and James felt a wave of certainty wash over him. Together, they were about to change not just his farm, but humanity's understanding of life itself. The time-lapse camera whirred quietly in the background, continuing to record the next chapter of their unfolding story. Agent Sarah Chen wasn't what James had expected. She was younger than the other agents, with kind eyes that widened in wonder rather than fear when the dragon stepped into view. Her official notice, warning about unauthorized drone activity over the farm, fell forgotten from her hands. "Remarkable," she breathed, while her colleagues reached instinctively for weapons. "Everyone, stand down. Look at how it's responding to him." The dragon had positioned itself halfway between James and the agents, its scales cycling through colors that filled the kitchen with dancing light. But instead of appearing threatening, it seemed to be putting on a show, like a child eager to demonstrate a new skill. "It's been here for 5 days. James explained, watching the agents' faces as they processed what they were seeing. "Found it in my wheat field, starving. I've been helping it recover." "And these changes to your crops?" Agent Chen asked, gesturing toward the window where the transformed fields shimmered like an ocean of living light. "There it's doing." Before James could answer, a new sound filled the air, the whoomp-whoomp of helicopter rotors. The dragon's head snapped up, its scales flaring bright with alarm. Through the window, they could see 3 military helicopters approaching low over the fields. "No!" Agent Chen grabbed her radio. "This is Agent Chen. Stand down immediately. The situation is under control. I repeat, stand down." But the helicopters kept coming. The dragon let out a trill that shook dust from the ceiling, and suddenly, every transformed plant in the fields began to pulse with light in synchronized waves. The helicopter pilots noticed too late. As they crossed the boundary of James's farm, their instruments went haywire. Electric blue tendrils of energy reached up from the crops, gently but firmly forcing the aircraft to turn back. "My God," one of the other agents whispered. "It's not just the plants. The whole farm is alive." He was right. The dragon's influence had spread through the entire ecosystem. Glowing earthworms drew light-filled patterns in the soil. Bees trailing sparkles flew between crystalline flowers. Even the air seemed to shimmer with possibilities. "Mr. Miller," Agent Chen said, her voice steady despite the wonder in her eyes. "I'm going to be honest with you. We've been monitoring unusual energy signatures from your farm for the past 2 days. We expected to find unauthorized experiments, maybe new agricultural technology. But this, She gestured at the dragon, who was now contentedly rubbing its head against James's leg. This changes everything. More vehicles were arriving, vans marked with scientific insignia, military, trucks, even what looked like a mobile laboratory. The dragon watched them all with those infinite eyes, seemingly unafraid, now that it had demonstrated its ability to protect itself. "They'll want to take it," James said, his hand moving to the crystalline scale in his pocket. "Study it. Lock it away." Agent Chen surprised him by shaking her head. "No, Mr. Miller, look around you. What's happening here is bigger than any lab. Your farm has become a testing ground for something revolutionary." She pulled out her phone, showing him satellite images of his property. The transformation was clearly visible from space, a glowing blue-green spiral with his farm at the center. "Whatever your friend is doing," she continued, "it's not just changing plants, it's changing the way life itself works, and it chose your farm, your care, to begin this process. I think the real question is, what do you need from us to help?" "It succeed," the dragon trilled happily, and James felt a wave of relief wash over him. He looked at the official notice still lying on the floor. Its warnings about drones and unauthorized activity seemed almost quaint now. The real story was writing itself across his fields in letters of living light. And for the first time, he truly understood his role in it. "Well," he said, as the dragon's scales shifted to match the sunrise colors painting the sky, "I suppose I could use some help explaining this to the neighbors." The first viral post came from Tommy Chen, Sarah's teenage nephew, who was video chatting with his aunt when the dragon decided to do a flyby. His shaky footage captured just 12 seconds of crystalline wings and trailing light. But it was enough. Within hours, farming dragon and alien harvest were trending worldwide. James sat in his kitchen, watching his old television as major news networks played Tommy's clip on repeat. The dragon, curled up in its favorite spot under the table, seemed more amused than concerned by its newfound fame. "And you're sure you want to do this?" Agent Chen asked, adjusting the microphone clip to James's collar. They'd agreed that a controlled interview would be better than letting speculation run wild. Before James could answer, his phone buzzed with another notification. Someone had dug up his grandfather's old social media posts about unusual lights over the farm years ago. The images were grainy, but unmistakable. The same crystalline patterns they were seeing now had appeared briefly in the fields decades earlier. "It's been here before," James realized, pulling out his grandfather's journal. The dragon perked up, moving to look at the weathered pages. Sure enough, there among the farming notes and weather predictions was a sketch of familiar, stellar eyes. "Your grandfather saw one of them." Agent Chen leaned in, fascinated. "Not saw," James corrected, reading the faded text. "He helped one, but it was wounded, couldn't stay long. Just enough time to leave a blessing," he wrote. "That's why our soil's always been so good." The dragon trilled, its scales shifting to match the exact colors in the old sketch. Outside, reporters gathered at the property line, their cameras capturing the increasingly spectacular light show as transformed crops continued to evolve. Local farmers were arriving too, but not to protest. They brought stories of their own, tales passed down through generations about mysterious lights and unexplained bounties. The dragon's presence wasn't an invasion. It was a return. "Look at this," Agent Chen said, showing James her tablet. People worldwide were sharing similar stories. Ancient cave paintings of crystalline beings helping crops grow. Folk tales about starlight taking physical form to aid struggling farmers. Medieval manuscripts describing gardens that glowed at night. The dragon stretched its wings, now spanning the width of the kitchen. Where the wingtips touched the walls, patterns of light spread like living fractals. James's home was becoming like his fields, not just a space, but a living thing. "They're calling you a hero," Agent Chen mentioned, scrolling through reactions. "The man who welcomed the future instead of fearing it." James shook his head. "I'm just a farmer, did what anyone would do, seeing a creature in need." The dragon disagreed, letting out a trill that made every transformed plant on the farm pulse with light simultaneously. The resulting flash was caught by dozens of cameras, and within minutes, new footage was spreading across the internet. But it wasn't the light show that caught people's attention this time. It was the way the dragon gently headbutted James, like a cat showing affection. The way he scratched under its crystalline scales with the casual comfort of someone petting. A family dog. In that moment, the alien became familiar. The impossible became natural. "Ready?" Agent Chen asked as the news crew they'd chosen set up their equipment. James looked at his fields through the window, shimmering with possibilities. At the dragon, watching him with those infinite eyes. At his grandfather's journal, its pages holding the first hints of this moment. "Actually," he said, "I think we should do the interview outside. People should see what's really happening here, not just the lights and the changes, but the growing." The dragon led the way, its scales bright with approval. As they stepped onto the porch, a wave of gasps and camera clicks swept through the gathered crowd. But James wasn't paying attention to them. He was watching new shoots rise from the transformed soil, reaching for the sky with stems of living crystal. The future was taking root, and he was helping it grow. The first tool changed. During a routine morning check of the fields, James was examining the transformed wheat with his old soil probe when the dragon brushed against the metal shaft. The change was instant. Crystalline patterns spiraled up the handle, and the probe began to hum with an otherworldly resonance. When James pushed it into the ground, he didn't just see soil composition, he saw life itself. Networks of glowing mycelia pulsed beneath the surface. Nutrient flows moved like rivers of light, and he could somehow sense the health of every plant connected to this living web. "Well, that's different," he muttered, but the dragon wasn't. Done. One by one it moved through his collection of farming implements, hoes, shovels, pruning shears. Each tool took on new properties, becoming something between technology and living organism. The transformed tractor was the most spectacular. At the dragon's touch, its metal skin developed the same crystalline patterns as the creature's scales. When James turned the key, instead of diesel fumes, it emitted a soft aurora of light. The engine didn't run so much as sing, harmonizing with the vibrations coming from the transformed fields. "It's not just changing things," Agent Chen observed, watching from a safe distance. "It's upgrading them, making them part of whatever system it's creating." She was right. The tools weren't just glowing, they were connecting with each other. And the land. The tractor could now sense exactly where its wheels needed to go to avoid damaging the crystalline root systems spreading through the soil. The harvesting attachments knew precisely when each plant had reached its perfect moment of ripeness. But it was James's grandfather's old scythe, hanging on the barn wall for decades, that demonstrated the most remarkable transformation. When the dragon touched it, the blade didn't just crystallize. It began to move on its own, gently harvesting only the ready plants while leaving the others to mature. "It's teaching them," James realized, watching his tools work in perfect harmony with the transformed land. "Teaching them how to farm the way it does." The dragon trilled in agreement, its scales brightening. Then it did something new. It touched James's hands with its snout. A warm tingling spread up his arms, and suddenly he could feel what the tools felt, could sense the vibrant life energy flowing through his fields as clearly as he used to see the green of growing things. Not everyone was celebrating these changes. From beyond the farm's boundaries came the sound of angry voices. A small group of protesters had gathered, holding signs warning about the dangers of alien influence and the loss of traditional farming. The dragon's scales dimmed slightly at their shouts, but James stood firm. "They're scared," he said, both to the dragon and the watching agents. "Change is always scary, but they'll understand when they see the harvest." As if in response, every transformed tool on the farm lit up simultaneously, their crystalline patterns synchronized with the dragon's own luminescence. The protest chants faltered as waves of light rippled across the fields, revealing glimpses of what these changes could mean for a hungry world. A small girl broke away from the protesters, running up to the fence despite her mother's calls. The dragon glided over, landing gracefully near her. James tensed, but needn't have worried. The creature gently touched a nearby wheat stalk, transforming it into a delicate spiral of living crystal that chimed softly in the breeze. The girl's wonder-filled laugh seemed to break some invisible tension. As she reached through the fence to accept the crystalline wheat, other protesters began to lower their signs, moving closer to see what was happening on this remarkable farm, where tools danced with starlight and crops sang to the touch. The weather radar images on Agent Chen's tablet showed something meteorologists had never seen before. A spiral storm system had formed directly over James's farm, but instead of the usual red and green precipitation patterns, the radar was picking up waves of crystalline energy that didn't exist in any atmospheric textbook. "This isn't natural," one of the military observers stated, watching lightning that shimmered like auroras dance between clouds that seemed to be turning translucent. "No," James agreed, standing on his porch with the dragon. "It's better than natural." The creature had been restless all day, its scales shifting through colors faster than usual. Now, as the storm intensified, James understood why. This wasn't just weather, it was a demonstration. The first drops fell like stardust, each one containing a microscopic fragment of the dragon's transformative energy. Where they touched, change followed. Grass became crystalline chimes singing in the wind. Trees developed luminous veins that pulsed with otherworldly light. The very air seemed to come alive with possibilities. "Get those readings," someone shouted. But their scientific instruments were transforming too, displays showing measurements that defied Earth's physics. That's when the military made their move. Despite Agent Chen's protests, a squad of armed soldiers approached the farm's boundary. Their orders, apparently, were to contain the transformation before it spread beyond control. The dragon's reaction was immediate, but unexpected. Instead of defending, it soared into the heart of the storm. Its wings, now spanning wider than ever, caught the crystalline lightning and channeled it into a display that made the northern lights look dim by comparison. Images of other worlds filled the clouds, planets where crystal forests reached. For triple suns, oceans that flowed with living light, fields of impossible crops that could feed billions. The dragon wasn't just showing power, it was showing purpose. "Stand down," Agent Chen shouted into her radio. "Look at what it's trying to tell us." The soldiers hesitated, their weapons lowered, as transformed raindrops fell on their equipment. Where the drops touched metal, flowers of living crystal bloomed. Above them all, the dragon continued its storm dance, each movement painting the sky with new possibilities. The radar images on Chen's tablet had stopped making sense, showing patterns that looked more like dimensional gates than weather systems. "It's not trying to change our world," James said, his voice carrying clearly despite the storm. "It's trying to wake it up. This is what Earth could be, what it wants to be." As if in response, every transformed plant on his farm began to sing, not with sound, but with pure light and energy, creating harmonies that could be felt in the bone and blood. The storm's spiral tightened, focused now directly over the farm's center. The dragon descended, landing between James and the soldiers. But instead of aggression, it displayed something unprecedented. Its scales shifted to perfect transparency, revealing the cosmic energy that flowed through its crystalline body. In that moment, everyone present understood. This wasn't an invasion or an experiment. It was an invitation. "My God," one of the soldiers whispered, lowering his weapon. "Completely. It's beautiful." The storm peaked, and with it came the dragon's greatest display yet. From its transformed scales erupted a dome of pure creation energy, expanding outward in a gentle wave. Where it passed, the world didn't end or change violently. It awakened. Radar stations across the country began picking up similar patterns, spreading outward from the farm. Not a storm anymore, but a pulse of transformation that called to something deep in the Earth's memory. This was always going to happen, James realized, watching crystalline flowers spring up between the soldiers' boots. The dragon didn't bring something alien to Earth. It came to remind Earth of what it used to be. As the transformed rain fell on faces turned skyward in wonder, the dragon let out a trill that seemed to resonate with the planet itself. The storm began to clear, revealing stars that somehow looked brighter, more alive, their light dancing through clouds that would never be quite normal again. Agent Chen's tablet, its screen now a beautiful lattice of living crystal, displayed one final radar image before transforming completely. A pattern of energy spreading across the continent that looked exactly like a dragon's wing, unfurling over a sleeping world. The morning after the storm, scientists from around the world gathered in James's transformed barn, their instruments displaying readings that defied conventional understanding. Dr. Emily Zhang, a leading biophysicist, stood before a wall of holographic data, her hands trembling slightly as she explained what they were seeing. "It's not just changing matter," she said, pointing to wavelength patterns that pulsed like heartbeats. "It's elevating it. Every transformed plant, every crystalline structure, they're all operating at a higher dimensional frequency than we thought possible." The dragon, perched in the barn's rafters, watched with those infinite eyes as humans struggled to comprehend what it had known all along. James stood beneath it, absent-mindedly running his fingers over the crystalline scale in his pocket, which now seemed to pulse in time with the readings on the scientists' screens. "Look at this cellular structure," another researcher called out, his microscope now partially crystalline itself. "The plants aren't just growing, they're evolving in real time, becoming something that can exist in multiple states simultaneously." Through the barn's open doors, they could see the transformed wheat fields shimmering with possibilities. Each stalk contained enough nutrients to feed 10 people, yet required almost no water to grow. The crystalline structures within them acted like infinite storage systems, preserving their food value indefinitely. "It's the solution to world hunger," Agent Chen said softly. "But it's more than that, isn't it?" The dragon glided down, landing next to a table covered in soil samples. Each sample glowed with internal light, containing entire ecosystems that were visible to the naked eye. When the dragon touched one with its snout, the soil arose in a spiral, forming a miniature model of Earth. Suddenly, the scientific instruments began picking up new signals. The dragon was broadcasting information directly into their devices, showing them the network of worlds it had helped transform. Earth wasn't the first, nor would it be the last. They were part of a grand garden spanning the galaxy. "The readings suggest," Dr. Zhang said, her voice filled with awe, "that our planet has the potential for this transformation, encoded in its very foundation. The dragon isn't changing Earth. It's awakening what was always here." James thought about his grandfather's journal, about generations of farmers working the land. "We've been preparing for this," he realized. "Every crop we grew, every field we tended, we were keeping the earth ready." The dragon trilled in agreement, and every transformed plant on the farm resonated in harmony. The scientists' readings spiked, showing energy patterns that looked like music written in light. "There will be those who fear this," Agent Chen warned, but her voice held no doubt. "Change this fundamental always frightens people." "Then we'll show them," James said, reaching up to scratch under the dragon's crystalline scales. "Not with force or demands, but with growth, with life itself." As if in response, one of the soil samples suddenly sprouted a tiny crystalline tree, its branches bearing fruit that glowed like captured starlight. When Dr. Zhang scanned it, she gasped. "This single fruit contains enough energy to power a small city," she announced. "And the tree, it's not using up resources, it's generating them, creating matter and energy in perfect balance." The dragon's scales shifted to match the morning sun, and for a moment everyone in the barn could see what it saw. A future where technology and nature weren't opponents but partners, where hunger and scarcity were memories, where humanity's role wasn't to conquer the earth, but to help it bloom. Outside, the transformed rain from last night's storm had spread for miles. Reports were coming in of crystalline flowers sprouting in city parks, of trees beginning to shimmer with internal light, of crops that sang to the touch. The change couldn't be contained now, nor should it be. The dragon looked at James with those galaxy-filled eyes, and he understood. This was just the beginning. His small farm had become the seed of something greater, a transformation that would spread not through force or fear, but through the simple, unstoppable power of things that grow. They began arriving at dawn, first a trickle, then a flood. Farmers from across the county, then the state, and finally from across the nation. Each carried a copy of the same petition. Let the change grow. What had started as a local movement had exploded overnight into something revolutionary. Sarah Chen watched from James's porch as the crowd gathered, many of them holding up transformed plants from their own lands. Crystalline corn from Iowa, luminous wheat from Kansas, glowing fruit from California orchards. The dragon's gift was spreading, carried by wind and rain, and the undeniable pull of the earth itself. "Never seen anything like this," James said, reading through the petition that had now gathered millions of signatures. "They're not just asking for the transformation, they're demanding the right to help it happen." The dragon soared overhead, larger now than ever, its wingspan casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the assembled crowd. Where its shadow touched, people gasped as they felt the same connection to the land that James had experienced. "Mr. Miller!" A young farmer pushed forward, holding up a handful of transformed seeds. "These grew in my field overnight. The whole crop just awakened. My family's been farming that land for 6 generations, and now it's like it's alive in a way we always dreamed about but never thought possible." Others shared similar stories. A woman from drought-stricken Arizona described how her transformed cacti had begun producing pure water from seemingly nowhere. A fruit farmer from Georgia showed videos of his orchards glowing with healing light, curing trees that had been sick for years. The dragon landed in the midst of the crowd, but there was no fear. Children reached out to touch its crystalline scales, while their parents held up phones, broadcasting the moment to millions watching online. Each touch spread the connection, helping more people understand what was happening. "It's not just about farming anymore," Agent Chen said, watching the scene unfold. "This is about humanity's relationship with Earth itself." She was right. The petition wasn't just a document, it was a declaration. Farmers weren't just asking permission to use the dragon's gifts. They were committing to becoming stewards of a new kind of agriculture, one that worked in harmony with the planet's awakening potential. James stood at his property line, where the transformed soil met untouched earth. As he watched, crystalline roots slowly extended across the boundary, encouraged by the hope and acceptance of the gathered crowd. The change wouldn't be stopped now. It was being welcomed. "We've been waiting for this," an elderly farmer said, her eyes bright with understanding. "Every season, every crop, every harvest. We were learning how to be ready. Now it's time to help our world grow into what it was always meant to be." The dragon trilled, and every transformed plant for miles responded, creating a symphony of light and energy that made the air itself shimmer with possibility. The crowd fell silent, feeling the vibration of change in their bones. From the back of the gathering came a new group, the protesters from before, led by the mother whose daughter had first approached the dragon. But they weren't carrying signs of opposition anymore. Instead, they brought food grown in traditional ways, offering it in exchange for transformed seeds. "We were wrong. the mother said simply. "We were afraid of losing our connection to the land. Now we see this is about deepening that connection, making it stronger than ever." James took a transformed wheat stalk and traded it for a loaf of traditional bread. The dragon watched the exchange with approval, understanding the importance of bridging old and new. As the sun began to set, the crowd didn't disperse. Instead, they set up lights and makeshift camps, determined to witness whatever came next. The petition had become more than a legal document. It was a covenant between humanity and the awakening earth. The dragon rose into the darkening sky, its crystalline body catching the last rays of sun. Below, thousands of faces turned upward, watching as it painted the clouds with visions of what their world could become. Not a sudden overthrow of nature, but a gradual, unstoppable blooming of potential that had slept in the soil since time began. "Tomorrow," James said to the gathered crowd, "we start planting the future." The symbols appeared at midnight, etched in lines of living light across the barn's transformed walls. The dragon had been unusually quiet all evening, its scales shifting through deep cosmic purples and blues, until finally it raised its head and began to project images that left the assembled scientists and officials speechless. Dr. Zhang's crystalline instruments hummed as they recorded the display. "These aren't just symbols," she breathed, watching patterns that moved like constellations. "They're coordinates, a map of transformed worlds." The dragon's stellar eyes fixed on James as the barn's interior became a three-dimensional star chart, showing hundreds of glowing points connected by paths of light. Each point, they realized, was a planet where other dragons had awakened similar transformations. "Earth isn't an experiment," Agent Chen said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "It's joining a network, a galaxy of living worlds." The dragon drilled, and the star map zoomed in on one particular system. The symbols rearranged themselves, telling a story of the dragon's own origins. It came from a world that had once been like Earth, struggling with scarcity, environmental damage, fear of change. Then the dragons had arrived, not to conquer, but to remind the planet of its true potential. James touched the crystalline scale in his pocket, and suddenly he could read the symbols as clearly as his grandfather's handwriting. "They're gardeners," he said, "cosmic gardeners, helping worlds evolve into something more alive, more aware." New images appeared, planets where crystalline forests reached miles into the sky, oceans that thought and dreamed, fields that produced food in harmony with all life. But more importantly, they saw the inhabitants of these worlds, not changed or controlled, but elevated, living in deeper connection with their transformed planets. "Look at the time frame," Dr. Zhang pointed, to a sequence of symbols. Each transformation took years to complete. It's not about instant change, it's about growth, about learning to work with the new possibilities. The dragon touched one of the symbols with its snout, and a new image formed. Earth, as it could be. Deserts bloomed with crystalline, life that generated water from light. Cities sparkled with living architecture that grew and adapted to its inhabitants' needs. Farms became centers of transformation, where the boundary between technology and nature dissolved into something greater than both. But it wasn't just a vision of physical change. The symbols showed how humanity would grow with their world, not losing their nature, but expanding it. Farmers becoming earth speakers, scientists becoming reality shapers, children born understanding the language of light and crystal. "We're not the first," Agent Chen realized, watching scenes from other transformed worlds. "But we might be among the most ready. Look how quickly the change is spreading here, how many people are embracing it." The dragon's scales brightened in agreement. More symbols appeared, showing how Earth's transformation was proceeding faster than any planet they'd encountered. The connection between humans and their world, though strained, had never been fully broken. James thought of his family's generations of farmers, of all the people who had worked the land with love and respect. "We kept the dream alive," he said. "Every culture, every tradition that talked about living in harmony with the earth, we were remembering what we could be." The star map expanded one final time, showing Earth's position in the network of transformed worlds. But now they could see the connections weren't just physical paths, they were flows of knowledge, of energy, of life itself. "It's an invitation," James said, watching new symbols form, "not just to change our world, but to join something larger, to become part of the living galaxy." The dragon trilled in confirmation, and every transformed plant on Earth resonated in response. From space, astronauts would later report seeing waves of crystalline light spreading across continents, following the paths of root and river as the planet itself began to stir with new awareness. The symbols faded, but they had been recorded, photographed, and more importantly, felt. Humanity had been given its first glimpse of not just a transformed world, but a transformed cosmos, waiting to welcome them. Dawn painted the crystalline fields with colors that had no names in any human language. James stood in his kitchen, studying an object the dragon had manifested during the night, what appeared to be an ancient star chart, but one that moved and shifted like a living thing. Its surface rippled with constellations that hadn't existed for millions of years, showing Earth's path through space and time. "The world leaders are ready," Agent Chen said, looking up from her phone. In capitals, across the globe, governments had convened emergency sessions. The decision they faced was monumental, whether to fully embrace the transformation that was already spreading or try to contain it. The dragon perched on the roof, its wings spread wide enough now to cast a shadow over half the farm. In the weeks since its arrival, it had grown from a starving creature to something that practically radiated power. Yet it waited, patient as a farmer watching crops ripen. "They're afraid," James said, tracing patterns in the star chart that seemed to respond to his touch. Not of the change itself, but of losing control. The dragon trilled softly, and the chart projected a new image into the air. Earth as it had been billions of years ago, when the first seeds of life had taken root. In those ancient oceans, crystals and cells had worked together, creating the foundations of all living things. The potential for this transformation had been there from the beginning. "It's not about control," James realized. "It's about remembering." Outside, the crowd that had gathered at the farm had grown larger. Farmers from every continent stood shoulder to shoulder with scientists, indigenous elders, and children who had never seen a crop grow. All of them could feel the moment approaching. Nidus, a decision point not just for governments, but for humanity itself. The star chart suddenly pulsed with new light, showing a timeline of choices made on other worlds. Some had embraced the change quickly, flourishing in ways their people had only dreamed of. Others had hesitated, letting fear slow their transformation. But in every case, the change had come. It was as natural as a seed breaking through soil. "Mr. Miller," Agent Chen said urgently, "they're asking for your input. As the first contact, as the farmer who started this, they want to know what you think." James looked at his transformed land, at the crystalline wheat that could feed thousands, at the soil humming with new life. He thought of his grandfather's journal, of generations of farmers who had worked in harmony with the earth. Then he looked at the dragon, at those eyes filled with galaxies, and knew what he had to say. He stepped onto his porch, facing the assembled crowd and the cameras that would carry his words across the globe. The dragon glided down beside him, and the star chart floated between them, showing possible futures like branches of a cosmic tree. "When I found this creature in my field," James began, his voice carrying clearly in the crystalline air, "I didn't think about politics or power. I saw something that needed help, and I helped. That's what farmers do. That's what humans do when we're at our best." The dragon's scales shifted, casting lights that made the star chart's images dance. This transformation isn't about losing who we are. It's about becoming more of who we've always been. Every culture, every tradition that talked about living in harmony with the earth, they were remembering this, remembering what's possible. He held up a handful of transformed soil, letting it sparkle in the morning light. We don't need to control this change. We need to grow with it. Like any farmer knows, you can't force a seed to sprout. You can only provide the right conditions and trust in life itself. The dragon spread its wings, and the star chart expanded to show Earth's position in the galactic network of transformed worlds. A single point of light, ready to join a greater garden. The choice isn't whether to change, James concluded. The choice is whether to embrace what we're becoming. I'm a farmer. I choose to grow. The dragon's trill of approval shook the air, and the star chart burst into a shower of living light that rained down on the crowd. Where each drop fell, people gasped as they felt what James had felt. The connection to their world, to the cosmos, to the infinite potential that had slept in Earth's bones since the first crystal formed in the first sea. The decision wasn't made by governments that day. It was made by every person who felt that connection and chose to nurture it, like a crop breaking through soil, like a dragon rising on crystalline wings. Humanity reached for the light. The transformation began with a single handful of soil. As James lifted it from his field, the dragon touched it with one crystalline claw, and the earth erupted into pure possibility. What had once been simple dirt became a swirling galaxy of life, each grain containing enough energy to spawn forests. Dr. Zhang's instruments overloaded trying to measure the change. "This sample," she stammered, "it's not just transformed, it's transforming, constantly evolving, becoming more with each passing second." The dragon had grown to its full magnificence now, its wingspan stretching nearly the length of a football field. As it rose into the air, its scales catching the morning sun, the change it had started began to spread exponentially. First, the crystalline patterns in James's wheat field synchronized, creating waves of light that pulsed like heartbeats. Then the transformation leapt beyond the farm's boundaries. Everywhere the light touched, the world awakened. Trees developed, crystalline cores that channeled sunlight directly into energy. Grass became sheets of living fiber optics, carrying information and nutrients through the soil. Even the air itself began to shimmer with newfound awareness. "It's beautiful, Agent," Chen whispered, watching flowers bloom in impossible colors, their petals both solid matter and pure light. The dragon soared higher, and its cry resonated with something deep in the Earth's crust. Underground aquifers transformed into living networks that could purify and distribute water without mechanical intervention. Barren soil became fertile, with crystalline nutrients that could adapt to any crop's needs. James walked his fields one last time as an ordinary farmer. Each step left footprints of glowing possibility, the soil responding to his presence like a living thing, which, he realized, it now was. "The samples show infinite replication potential," Dr. Zhang reported, her own lab equipment now partially crystalline. "Any transformed soil can spread the change, but only in harmony with its environment, its evolution with wisdom built in." From space, astronauts watched in awe as waves of transformation spread across continents. Desert edges bloomed with crystalline plants that generated their own water. Polluted areas sprouted organisms that could transmute toxins into pure energy. The dragon landed beside James, and together they watched the horizon shimmer with change. But it wasn't just the land transforming. People who worked with the new soil found themselves developing a deeper connection to the earth. Farmers could sense their crops' needs. Gardeners could communicate with their plants through pulses of light. "We're changing too," James realized, looking at his hands, which now gave off a faint crystalline glow. Not into something else, but into more of what we always could be. The transformed soil sample in the lab had become a teaching tool, showing scientists how to work with, rather than against, nature's new potential. Every study revealed new possibilities: crops that could feed millions, plants that could heal diseases, trees that could clean the atmosphere. As the day progressed, the dragon's power reached its peak. Its wings became translucent with energy, and from them fell a rain of pure transformation. But unlike before, there was no fear. People stepped out into the crystalline drops willingly, embracing the change with open arms and hearts. The soil of Earth had awaited this moment for billions of years, since the first crystals formed in ancient seas. Now at last, the planet was remembering what it could be. Not a resource to be used, but a living garden growing into infinity. James looked at the dragon, understanding at last why it had chosen his farm, his care, his simple act of kindness. To begin this planetary awakening, sometimes the biggest changes grew from the smallest seeds of compassion. The transformed soil glowed brighter as night fell, providing its own light. In its crystalline depths, one could see echoes of the galaxy, waiting to welcome Earth into its network of living worlds. The time of separation was ending. The time of growth had begun. As twilight deepened into night, the dragon rose to its full height, its crystalline body emanating patterns of light that danced across the transformed landscape. These weren't the random displays of before. They formed distinct sequences, a language written in luminescence that spoke directly to the heart of human understanding. Scientists scrambled to record the patterns, but those who had worked with the transformed soil found they could read them instinctively. The message began with images of Earth's past: pristine forests, clear skies, oceans teeming with life. Then came visions of the damage, pollution, deforestation, species vanishing into darkness. But this wasn't meant to shame. The dragon's light speech shifted, showing humanity's persistent efforts to heal their world. Every conservation project, every replanted forest, every cleaned river appeared in shimmering detail. The message was clear: humans had never stopped trying to restore balance. "It's not just showing us what we did wrong," James said, watching the patterns reflect off the crystalline wheat. "It's showing us what we did right." The dragon's next sequence of lights revealed Earth's hidden potential. Beneath cities lay dormant seeds of transformation. In the hearts of polluted zones slept the power to transmute poison into life. Even in the most damaged places, hope waited like a flower ready to bloom. Agent Chen, who had become as much a student of the change as its observer, translated the patterns for the global audience, watching through countless devices. "The dragon says we were never meant to be separate from nature. The divide between human and natural world was an illusion, one we can finally let go of." New patterns spiraled outward, showing the next phase of Earth's evolution. Cities would not be torn down, but transformed, their structures becoming living things that grew and adapted to their inhabitants' needs. Transportation would flow through crystalline networks that moved people and goods without consuming resources. But the most stunning revelation came in the dragon's depiction of humanity's role. The light patterns showed people not as masters or servants of nature, but as gardeners of reality itself. Every farmer would become a shaper of life. Every child would grow up speaking the language of light and crystal. "Look," Dr. Zhang pointed to a particularly complex pattern. "It's showing us how to work with the transformation, not just accepting it, but helping it grow in new ways." The dragon trilled, and the light patterns formed a map of Earth's future. Deserts bloomed with crystalline forests that generated their own water. Oceans healed, their waters cleaned by living filters that turned pollution into pure energy. The very air became a medium for communication between all living things. James stepped forward as the patterns focused around him. The dragon had chosen his farm for a reason. Not because he was special, but because he represented something essential to humanity's nature: the desire to nurture, to help life grow. The light patterns shifted one final time, revealing Earth's place in the galactic network. Other transformed worlds pulsed like gems in the cosmic fabric, each one unique, each one connected. Earth would not lose its identity in this transformation. It would discover its true self. The dragon's giving us a choice, James realized, watching the patterns pulse with possibility. Not whether to change, that's already happening, but how to change. We can help shape what we're becoming. As if in response, the dragon's scales erupted in a display more brilliant than any before. The light patterns formed a bridge between Earth's past and its potential future, showing how every human culture had glimpsed pieces of this transformation in their myths and dreams. The message ended with a simple pattern that everyone somehow understood. An invitation to join in the greatest gardening project in Earth's history. Not as subjects or rulers, but as partners in an evolution that would transform not just their world, but their understanding of what was possible. The dragon's final light pattern showed a single seed sprouting into a cosmic tree, its branches reaching through stars, its roots deep in Earth's transformed soil. The message was both ancient and new. From the smallest acts of nurturing could grow infinite possibilities. As the patterns faded, they left behind a changed world, not just in the crystalline structures that now dotted the landscape, but in the way people saw their place in the universe. They were not meant to conquer nature or submit to it, but to help it grow into something greater than either human or dragon had imagined alone. The first harvest of the transformed crops began at sunrise. James stood in his crystalline wheat, a field, the dragon circling overhead, as farmers from around the world gathered to learn the new ways of gathering. Traditional combines had been transformed into living machines that hummed with conscious purpose, their blades now crystalline, extensions that could sense the perfect moment to harvest each stalk. But it wasn't just the equipment that had changed. As James demonstrated the new techniques, people discovered they could feel the readiness of the crops through the transformed soil beneath their feet. The land itself communicated with its caretakers, creating a harmony between farmer and field that had only existed in ancient legends. "Watch this," James said, touching a wheat stalk that sparkled with inner light. The entire field responded, rippling with patterns that showed exactly which plants were ready for harvest. "The crop tells you what it needs. All we have to do is listen." The dragon landed beside a group of children who had come with their farming families. As they reached out to touch its scales, their eyes widened with understanding. The creature was teaching them directly, sharing knowledge through pulses of light that transformed complex agricultural concepts into intuitive understanding. "The yields are impossible," Dr. Zhang announced, analyzing the first samples. "Each crystalline grain contains the nutritional value of an entire traditional wheat stalk. And they're not just food. They're capable of teaching the human body how to better process nutrients." Around the world, similar harvests were beginning. Rice paddies in Asia glowed with possibilities, their crops ready to feed millions. African savannas sprouted crystalline millet that could flourish in the harshest conditions. South American fields produced living foods that could adapt to each consumer's nutritional needs. Agent Chen, now serving as a liaison between farmers and governments, watched the harvest with tears in her eyes. "This is the end of world hunger," she said. "But it's also the beginning of something we don't even have words for yet." The dragon took flight again, showering the harvesters with drops of light that left them glowing with newfound connection to the land. Each person touched by the light became a conductor of the transformation, able to spread understanding through direct experience rather than just words. As the morning progressed, the first trucks loaded with crystalline wheat prepared to depart for cities around the world. But these weren't ordinary shipments. The transformed crops remained alive and aware, capable of teaching others how to work with their new nature. "Remember," James called to the departing drivers, "you're not just carrying food, you're carrying change itself." The dragon's cry echoed his words, and the crystalline wheat in each truck responded with pulses of light that matched its rhythm. This harvest wasn't just feeding bodies, it was feeding the transformation of human consciousness. In the fields, the second planting had already begun. Farmers watched in amazement as crystalline seeds planted themselves, responding to the living soil's call. The dragon glided low over the fresh-turned earth, its wings leaving trails of light that quickened the growth process. "Look at the soil structure," Dr. Zhang said, examining samples from the harvested areas. "It's not depleted at all. If anything, it's more fertile now. These fields could produce harvests continuously, each crop more nutritious than the last." But the most remarkable change was in the farmers themselves. Generations of agricultural knowledge combined with the new awareness flowing through the transformed land. They were becoming more than cultivators. They were turning into what the dragon had shown them they could be, gardeners of reality itself. As the sun reached its peak, James gathered everyone for a moment of reflection. The harvested fields sparkled behind them, already sprouting new growth. The dragon perched on a crystalline storage silo that had once been ordinary metal, its scales reflecting the myriad possibilities sprouting across the planet. "Today, we're not just harvesting crops," James said, holding up a handful of living grain that glowed with inner light. "We're harvesting hope. Every seed we plant, every field we tend, becomes part of Earth's new story." The dragon trilled in agreement, and the harvested crops sang back in harmonies of light and life. The first harvest of Earth's transformed age was more than successful. It was miraculous. But as James watched new growth already reaching for the sky, he knew it was just the beginning of what they could grow together. 1 year later, James stood before a simple crystalline plaque that had grown from the soil of his farm. Its surface shifted with living light, telling the story of how Earth's transformation began with a single act of kindness. The dragon, now a magnificent being of pure light and crystal, rested beside him, its form so large it seemed to bridge earth and sky. "Here," the plaque read in letters of flowing light, "a farmer helped a starving creature, and in doing so helped Earth remember what it could become." Millions had made the pilgrimage to this spot over the past year, touching the plaque and feeling the echo of that first moment of transformation. But today was special. Today marked the completion of the initial phase of Earth's awakening. The dragon had shown them that transformation wasn't a single event, but a continuous flowering of possibility. Across the planet, crystalline cities grew in harmony with the land. Transportation networks pulsed with living light, moving people and goods through strands of pure energy. Every field and forest hummed with new awareness. "We thought we were just feeding a hungry creature," James said to the gathered crowd, many of whom glowed with their own inner light now. "But we were feeding the future itself." The dragon's scales shifted in agreement, broadcasting images of what the year had brought. Deserts transformed into crystalline gardens. Oceans healed by living filters that turned pollution into pure energy. The air itself had become a medium for communication between all living things. Dr. Zhang, her laboratory now a growing crystal that thought and dreamed, presented the final readings. "The transformation has reached critical mass," she announced. "Earth is now fully awake." Agent Chen, who had become Earth's first ambassador to the network of transformed worlds, smiled as she received signals from across the galaxy. Other planets welcomed them as equals now, as gardeners of reality who had helped their world bloom. But it was the children who showed the most remarkable changes. Born into this transformed world, they spoke the language of light and crystal, as naturally as their parents had once spoken words. They played in fields of living energy, their laughter creating ripples of growth and possibility. The dragon rose, spreading wings that now spanned the horizon. Its first cry had been weak, a starving creature's plea for help. Now its voice rang with the music of transformation, a symphony of life that resonated with every crystalline structure. On Earth, James reached into his pocket and pulled out that first scale he had found in the barn. It had become a template for change, a seed crystal that helped others understand how to work with the transformation. But more than that, it was a reminder that the greatest changes could grow from the smallest acts of compassion. The memorial isn't just for what happened here, he told the gathered crowds. It's for what's happening everywhere, every day, as we learn to help our world grow. The dragon touched the plaque with one crystalline claw, and the story written in light expanded to include all the changes that had followed, not just the physical transformation of Earth, but the transformation of human consciousness. They had become what they were always meant to be, cultivators of wonder, gardeners of possibility. As twilight painted the crystalline landscape in colors that had no names in any human language, James looked at what his simple farm had become. Not just a place where food grew, but a place where reality itself flowered into new forms of life and awareness. The dragon's final gift was to show them that the story had no end. Each day brought new transformations, new possibilities, new ways of growing together. The plaque's surface would never be still, just as life itself would never stop evolving. "Remember," James said, as the dragon's light blessed the gathering. "One last time, it all started with helping something grow." Above them, the stars sparkled with welcome, each one a potential garden waiting for Earth's children to help cultivate. The transformation hadn't just changed their world, it had given them a galaxy of possibilities to grow into.